guys, this is Faith Reimagined, retelling biblical stories from an African perspective. This is our new episode. And so today we're going to look at a conversation that Floyd had with Professor Nel, who's our guest today. So Professor Nel is a dean of students in the theology department at the University of Stellenbosch. They had a conversation about the role and influence of academia in shaping what we know now as theology. So I hope that you guys enjoy this conversation. If you have any comments, please drop them there. Or if you have any questions, we'd love to engage with you guys. So let's check out this conversation.
Thanks, Wongs, for the introduction. Again, we just want to continue the conversation, but more practically looking at academia and the impact that academia has in creating narrative. So Prof, could you just tell us in your own experience in the academia world, how have you seen academia have a strong influence in creating narratives and just the power in shaping people's minds and stories?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Floyd and Bonks, for the invite. I think one of the questions and challenges that specifically Fees Must Fall posed to the academia was the fact that it was only the voice of the powerful, that it amplified the voice of Western nations over, for example, Africa, which is our context. Yeah. And that illustrated how at least students and student movements experienced academia. Now, of course, that resonated with a long tradition of anti-colonialist and post-colonialist thinkers who were saying that the kind of academy that we've been inherited and that we've, in a sense, received is an academy that only foregrounds the voices of, for example, European thinkers or thinkers from the North, and only the experiences and the questions that thinkers from the North grapple with. It's this old saying that, it is the powerful who tells the story. And I think what happened in 2015 and 16 was that Fees Must Fall movement reminded the academy, and it was a wake-up call for the academy to come to terms with the fact that to a large degree the academy, at least in South Africa, has foregrounded those voices. And yes, like I said, there was voices that challenged it. I'm just referring to, for instance, if you read the stuff of Frans Fanon, if you read the stuff of post-colonial thinkers in the South African context, like Steve Biko, for example, in the 70s, then you hear that there is a critique of the foregrounding only of Western, the foregrounding only of white voices within the academy. And I think we're only coming to terms with that now.
Sure. So just really taking that more into that academia world space into the building of theology or building of sort of our Christian faith, I've often seen that at least if we, for example, if we form the Reform Circle, there's a strong emphasis on scholarship. There's a strong emphasis on tell a story a certain way in homiletics, and this is how you ought to do things. Have you seen academia also has that strong impact in the theology space, and eventually leading to a point where the way we tell narratives seemed as if the voiceless do not form part of that story?
Look, I mean, our own history, South African history, is a history where only particular voices have been heard. I've said it in the previous point. And in terms of theology, one can argue that while I would affirm, and I think the three of us would agree that scholarship is important. It is important that we reflect systematically on why we do things, how we do things, and what are the theories behind, the way that we do things. And when I talk about do things, I refer to, how we live out our faith, how we witness to our faith, how we make a difference in the world. So it is important, and the biblical word is discernment. It is important to discern. It is important to discern in a systematic way, and I think that's where theology comes in. It enables us to discern in a systematic way and to reflect on what we do. But now the question is, what do we reflect on? Whose experiences do we reflect on, and who do we engage with? Who is our dialogue partners? Now, if our dialogue partners remain the philosophers from Europe or American philosophers that grapple with their own questions, that grapple with questions in their context, then we are missing the point that actually we should be grappling with the questions that is around us here in our African context. And that's been, like I said earlier, that's been the kind of challenge that came from post-colonial thinkers to say, let's grapple with the questions of our context, number one. But also, and here's the thing, let's grapple with it in the way that makes sense to the people, who lives here. And this is where language comes in. This is where the style of our engagement come in. And this is also where the format of our outputs come in. If our output is only going to be books, like the tradition has it, then it cuts out a lot of people where what matters is the oral tradition. What matters is, we reflect on our experiences, perhaps through music, through song, through the body, through dancing. So also the format in which we eventually, in a way, articulate our theology also matters. But also what matters, like I said earlier, who is our dialogue partners? Is it the trained philosopher, overseas, or is it the peasant grappling with issues of, exclusion? We talk COVID-19, but let's say the poor, the hungry, those who are in the streets, who say, "Give us bread." Do we dialogue with them? Do we ask them, "This is your questions. How do we respond to that? How do our theology becomes a force of transformation, empower people to recognize their narrative, their story, and to be able to, face the powers that be." So I think in philosophy and in theology, there has been a shift to what in theology was called, at some point, liberation theology. It's not we don't talk about that anymore, but it's still in the background. Now, the point of the liberation theology was to say that our theology, in line with Jesus's mandate, should serve the liberation of people, in particular poor people, people marginalized, people oppressed. And if it doesn't serve the liberation of people, if it doesn't serve the coming out of people out of oppression, then it still serves the narratives of the powerful and the agendas of them.
So just drilling on to that point, when we spoke with Bongs last time, talking about decolonizing the gospel, often the message as we know it seems to not challenge the strong, or there's a sense in which the inclusion of the gospel message does not challenge the powerful to give away their powers for those that they serve. And I'm thinking particularly how we read Philippians 2 often. I think depending on where you come from, someone reads Philippians 2 and I've heard it being used to say, no, that the marginalized must come in humility when they want to discuss certain things. However, they never talk about the fact that Jesus is also giving away his power for the sake of the brokenness of humanity. So how do you balance this, particularly in theology, where it seems like, no, it's just a political scheme to want to grapple or exploit the poor? How do we then come into the picture and say, no, you know what? The gospel message is about or is endorsing this type of things and not just political. And how then can we create a theology that speaks into it and is normal in our churches?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but I think it's an important question. I think it's important that we, in the first place, acknowledge the fact that, you know, when it comes to the Christian gospel and the Christian theology, that often we served the interest of the poor, of the powerful. I think we have to acknowledge and confess. I think secondly, it is in a sense a conversion that need to take place towards the Jesus that said, you know, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom to many. We need to almost convert to the poor Jesus, you know, when he would say, the foxes have holes, but I don't have a place to lay my head. You know, is that the kind of Jesus that we want to serve or convert towards, become disciples of that Jesus? I think it's important that we affirm that. And then thirdly, I would say that, like I said, in terms of our theology, in terms of our witness, it would be important to journey with people who are oppressed or poor, and to use the resources that we have, because we have voice. What we are doing here, it gives voice to a particular to people, and it in a sense it challenges people. So we can use these spaces, these platforms. In our context, theology context, we can use the spaces at universities where students who are marginalized or students who come from poor backgrounds get access, and where they are supported to be able to raise their voices. As theologians, as people in church and in faith communities, we can constantly choose to journey with people who are marginalized, and not just coming there in a sense of being the hero and coming to save them, or coming with welfare programs, but rather to say, let us come alongside people. Let us first get to know people, you know. First affirm what is already gifts within that community. And as we start, and maybe it's a long-term journey, but that's fine, as long as we affirm the dignity of people and not, you know, come again to make them feel as if they are the responsible for the fact that the system is skewed. Rather to say, you know, we consciously side with people. We in the Reformed tradition, and the listeners and the readers can check or Google the Belhar Confession. Belhar is a township here in Cape Town, and in that context, in the 80s, 1986, context of apartheid, this confession, Christian confession, came out to say, but God is in a special way the God of the needy, God of the poor, those who are oppressed. And in a situation of injustice, God chose, you know, justice, to stand with those who are wronged. Now that doesn't mean that God doesn't love the powerful and the rich, but the love in that context is in a different way. It is to call the powerful and the rich to conversion. Say, you know, what we have, the story of the rich young man. What you have, go and share it. Go and use that to change situation. I think that's I think also in a practical way, the kind of role that we can play.
So I think like just like lastly, sort of like just bringing the theme of what you just said now. When you reflect on what the academia world is doing as we speak, and I mean the conferences that you have to go to and you sit in, do you have a sense that the people who are actually writing these strong narratives are so far away from the realities that are happening on the ground, and so by so doing perpetuate the same historical system of not including the marginalized into the story? And then the last one is, how do you then reverse that in theology today, and even in African theology as we know it? How can we do a better job at including the voices that are not heard or previously heard before?
No, I mean, it is a contestation. There is contestations in these conferences between the voices of those who want to keep the narratives of the powerful as center, and the voices of the other, where theologians come more and more to say, but we need something different and something new. So I think we need to affirm that there is a contestation taking place in that respect. Sometimes what happens is that there are certain victories, but at other times you walk out of a conference and you have the sense that we're back in the old days of the missionaries. So then there are other times where you also feel, I think, that the voices of the marginals have been heard, and you can walk away with a sense of, yes, we are making progress. But that is not enough. In the week I had a conversation with colleagues that the fruit of our research, the fruit of these conferences, need to be changed in terms of social structures. It need to be changed in terms of how communities are empowered. It need to be changed in terms of whose voices are heard. So if I, as a researcher, publish a paper and I publish my books, and I am the only one who gets the benefit, then I failed, that call to stand and to amplify the voice of the marginalized. But when, if I take your local community, when it has an impact on the policies, of local government, when it has impacted business, when it has impacted society in a very real way, to strengthen, the circumstances of the poor, then our research has done, has reached, I think, the goal that it's supposed to reach. And hopefully that's the kind of future that's the kind of future that I would, want to be part of, that I want to build, where our research is measured not in terms of the number and the volumes of the books, but it's measured in terms of the change in society. How, the voices of the marginalized have been heard, but also have become a force, a social force, to change structures. And I think that's something, just to come back, I think that's something that I want to affirm in terms of the Fees Must Fall, that, those student movements, those social movements have effected changes that we are still, as we speak, that we are still grappling with. So I think those are the kind of ways in which we can, in a very concrete way, also make a difference.
Sure. So are there just before I let you go, are there any books or authors that you could recommend, who you would say, to a certain degree, they were faithful in doing research that seemed meaningful, and that there are voices that they tried reaching out to, that we should maybe start today? So something practical for our listeners.
I've got a few books that I can show you. I'm gonna focus on 4 here, and why most of these are relatively old works. Now I want to make the point that what we are talking about here today and the Feast Must Fall, it built on an earlier tradition. You refer to Frans Fanon. You can even refer to the work of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educationalist. I refer to Steve Biko. Earlier traditions, and constantly we are still in that struggle. In that struggle today. So the first book is a book by Itumeleng Mosala, Biblical Hermeneutics and Black Theology. It's a book that it's a book that he grappled with. He was in Botswana at the time. It's based on his doctoral dissertation, where he grappled with how do we understand the biblical text, what we referred to earlier, and allow different voices to speak into our interpretation of the biblical text.
Sure.
So that's the one that I want to refer to, and then of course I will always refer to Transforming Mission by David Bosch. You have maybe some of your readers and listeners have seen this. In the first section of his of this thick book, he gives a bit of a different interpretation of the whole biblical text, and he says it's kind of reading the Bible as a missionary text, but not in the traditional way. I think that would be very interesting. And then there's two books by a guy by the name of Gerald West. Now Gerald West is an Old Testament scholar in UKZN. The one book is Biblical Hermeneutics of Liberation, Modes of Reading the Bible in the South African Context. There's his book with a nice picture as well of the people, reading the text together. And so this is a bit more, you can almost say a bit more academic in a sense, but this one is based on that book, where he's developing what he call contextual Bible studies. So this gives you the mode of how to read the Bible contextually, different modes of reading it with communities, and in a way also amplifying the voices of those who've never being affirmed in their interpretation of the text. So those are this is a book that I think it's very concrete. People can use it in communities. People can even with different communities study the Bible together.
Sure. Prof, thank you so much for the rich knowledge and just spending time with us. I'm really hoping that this goes a long way for even people who are looking for resources to get started and just educating themselves. I'm hoping that some of these things were helpful. So once again, thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thanks for the invitation, and I'm your biggest fan. I'm the biggest fan of your channel on YouTube. Great stuff, guys.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Prof. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.